So I always like to think that government is the largest and longest running open source project the world has ever seen. I mean, think about it. You got a bunch of sub-modules. Different people contribute to different parts. It's definitely got a lot of bugs. And so you think about it and you say, OK, well, if we treat government as an open source project, what can we learn from the open source community that maybe we can take back to the open government community? You look at open source, it's not just about publishing code. It's not just about putting a zip file up on an FTP server. It's about open sourcing process alongside of it. It's about opening up issues, opening up pull requests, saying, hey, this isn't just open source, it's also collaborative. So how do we get here? Take a look at open government. Slide's working, there we go. Open government, right? So we started out open government where, come on, slide kicker, this was definitely, there we go, it's a little bit slow, sorry about that. Started open government, right, where it was this really bespoke collaboration model, right? So if you wanted to get a copy of the Constitution, you went to George Washington, hey, Georgie, give me a copy, and the process was invented each time. That wasn't very efficient. So then we came up with the Freedom of Information Act, right? That said, we're going to standardize the process by which people ask for information. You have a need, you ask it of us, we give you a response, you use it to do whatever you need to do. But it turns out, in actuality, the process was a little bit more repetitive than that. People kept asking for the same information over and over again. If I want to know where the voting precincts are, I would email or I would go on a certain website and submit a form asking for that information. But then the next day, somebody else would come along and would ask that same exact question. So government decided, hey, let's take this one part of the process. I love this slide. I feel like Madden. It's like, well, there's your problem right there. You should have gone left, right? You take that part of the process, you standardize it, and you say, OK, we know this is going to keep happening. We know this is a cycle. Let's anticipate that need. So then you had the Obama administration, right, with the Open Government Initiative. It made open the new default. Rather than having to go and ask the government for information, by default, that information was publicly available. They publish it, I consume it, I use it to do whatever I need to do. But then we had another blocker. Then we had another choke point. Once I get that information, that's not the end of the transaction. I then might have questions about that information. Hey, is this date column month, day, year, or day, month, year? What does this mean? How often is this data updated? So I have all these sort of questions. And the way that's handled today is primarily through email. I'll email info@agency.gov. I'll fill out a form on a website. I might see somebody to drink up or something like that. And I'll ask them, can you tell me the process behind this data? All that's happening in private. And the problem with that is that the same questions get asked over and over and over again. If I want to know how a certain column in a certain data set is formatted, I ask that on Monday. Chances are somebody else is going to have that same question and doesn't have access to the email, doesn't have access to that exchange. That's all going to be locked up in Outlook, all going to be locked up in my iPhone, all going to be locked up on my computer. So let's take a little example. We're going from closed source to where I couldn't get access to the information, to open source, where I had to actually ask for the information, to open government, right? And you look at that as we went from a pull model to a push model, right? Where I had to ask for the information to now you're just giving the information proactively. So hold on to that image for a second as we start talking about open source. But first, a quick example. So let's say you're a lawyer, right? You go out there and you write this really important legal document. You say, look, here's my important legal document. Here's the non-disclosure agreement you asked for. I send it to you as my client. And you're like, Ben, this is really embarrassing. It's actually not an important legal document. It's actually an impotent legal document. That's what you sent me. And so how do I surface that change back to you? How do I communicate that change, right? Here in this case, we're only talking about one letter being different. But what if it's an entire paragraph that needs to change? What if it's a law? What if it's normalizing a certain column in a data set? What if it's an entire open source project? So today, imagine this image. This is where I like to think that the open government process is. We know how to publish data. We're really great at that. We went from you have to ask me to here it is. But we're not really great at going from open to collaborative, to go from here is the data, here's how the sausage is made, to help us make that sausage better, right? So if you get this important legal document, what do you do with it? Maybe you got it via Dropbox. Maybe you can kind of like make a change and hit save and sync it back and forth, but they don't really get a notification. Maybe I can send it to you via email. God forbid, maybe I can fax it to you. Everyone knows what a fax machine is, right? I know I'm young, but we're good? All right, sweet. All right, so the problem with that is we're not exposing process. We're not showing other people that I have this question and that this conversation is ongoing. So if I sent that same email, that same important legal document to 3 to 4 to 5 people, you're going to get all of a sudden 5 different copies of that same change back. 4 people, 5 people are going to want to add a little R in there. So how do you resolve that problem? How does open source resolve that problem? We started out the exact same way, right? We started out with a piece of technology called Subversion. It's centralized version control. I am the publisher. You can get a copy of that software, and you can do what you need to do with it. So I publish it. You consume it. And then you can modify it and you can patch it. So if you want to improve it to change the font size or adjust a column or something like that, you can do that. And the way that happened was something called a patch, right? So in this case, the patch would say, take the top line, add an R after the fourth letter, and here you go. I would theoretically contribute that back. The changes would be republished out, and we go on with our merry lives. The problem is that's not actually how it worked in practice. In practice, I would email you and say, hey, Ben, I know I'm not a lawyer, but this says impotent legal document. I think you really meant important legal document. Or, hey, Mr. Government Guy, I'm not a subject matter expert, but I think this should be in megabytes or millimeters or whatever it might be. All these questions that consumer of open data have. How frequently is this going to be updated? All of that was being stored away in email, in private. So these conversations, if I had the same question, there was duplication of efforts. Right? There's no way to surface this for other people to see what's going on. I'd eventually get that patch produced, it would then be contributed, and then it would be republished. That's a very complex and very confusing process. Here's the README for Linux, the popular open source operating system, the kernel. If I want to contribute to Linux, I have to know which email address to send it to, how to format this email. It's incredibly confusing. The central thesis is this, is that technology is pushing us to the tipping point where it's becoming easier to work together than to work alone. I no longer have to read that giant Linux contribution message. Open source has changed in several different ways, but I'd like to dial in on two of them. The first is that it's becoming electronic. All these decisions that were in email, that were hidden from the public, that were between people in meetings and government, they might be in big smoke-filled rooms with wood paneling, all that stuff in open source is exposed for other people to see. It's done on chat, it's done on github.com, it's done in message forums, it's done in ways that are electronic, that are controlled, and that you can always, 6 months down the line, see exactly how a decision came about. Second, it's available. At any given point, I can send you the URL to a decision that happened in open source, and you can see why that decision happened, who was in that decision, exactly what was changed, why it was changed, when it was changed. All that is made and all that is exposed. It's about exposing process. So this is how the open source contribution model works today. Author publishes information, collaborator modifies that information, and here's the big difference. That's not sent directly to the individual publisher. That's then sent out to the community. The community reviews it, they iterate on it, they then reach a general consensus before it goes back to the publisher and eventually gets merged into the master project. The advantage of this is all of a sudden this scales, this is manageable. You can have thousands of people contributing this way, and it's no longer the constraint of, oh, that's too hard to do. So this is how you contribute to Project Open Data, the White House Open Data Policy. Anyone is encouraged to fork and contribute by submitting a pull request. It's simple, it's standardized, and with different tools, anyone can do this. So we went from closed source to centralized open source, where I own the information, to decentralized open source. So we have that same shift from the push model to the pull model, just like we saw in open government. And what I'd argue is the next step for open government is to go from an open model to a collaborative model. It's not just here's my law, it's not just here's my data, but here's how the sausage is made, help me make it better, right? So what is going to change in open government? I think we're going to start seeing people open sourcing solutions, not problems, right? President Obama, when he got elected, his campaign slogan wasn't, yes, we did. It was, yes, we can. He painted a vision, and he got people on his side. He got people to contribute to a shared project. It's about building communities around shared challenges. So the open government of tomorrow could look a lot like the open source community of today, where we're not just publishing, we're not just being megaphones, we're not doing everything in private via email, but using these platforms that already exist to make it easier that we're doing things out in the public, we're exposing process, we're showing people how things are done, and they're showing a trust in the community and seeing it as a resource, not as a liability. So who's doing this? I mentioned Project Open Data. Project Open Data is the White House Open Data Policy. Generally, when these sort of things are published, they're already outdated by the time they go through clearance. It's an open, living, collaborative document hosted on GitHub. Federal employees and members of the public are invited to contribute to it, and that can continually develop over time. We have the Web Experience Toolkit coming out of Canada. A little shout out to David backstage, right? Canada, woo, okay, cocky, anybody? I'm trying here. So Canada, this is probably one of the largest open source projects. It has something like a couple hundred forks. They have rather than reinventing the wheel each time, they made a shared open source accessible look and feel for each of their websites. We have the city of Philadelphia. They wanted to showcase where different flu shots were available. You know, flu season's coming around the corner. So rather than just publishing that data, they actually went ahead and created an open standard and said, other cities, please join in this discussion. Please join in the standards. Help us make the standard better. Again, we're exposing process. We're building a platform. City of San Francisco, just about 2 weeks ago, released all their laws online on GitHub, again, saying, hey, here are our laws. It's no longer a faired away in Westlaw or Lexis. Build something cool on top of it. And last, we're seeing this on the federal level with the US government come back with feedback repos, saying, hey, if you have any questions, we know all the developers are here, let us know. So I'd like to invite everyone here today to join the community. We have a small private beta at github.com/community. If you are a government employee and you have a government email address, just email government@github.com. We'd love to get you involved. That's how we're open sourcing problems and not just open sourcing solutions. It's a discussion forum. And last, this was launched earlier today. I was hoping to do it during the talk, but Jessica Lord, former fellow, and I, right from the backstage here today, launched government.github.com. We're just so inspired by all the stories today. We'd like to help you to tell your story so that when you go and say, hey, I want to do this crazy thing, you're not looked at like a hippie with a tie-dye laptop. But there's a broader movement, there's a broader community, there's a broader ecosystem. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you on GitHub, I hope to see you on the internet, and I hope this to be the start of a conversation. Thank you.